Hello, Ryan here, and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all of the news from the week just past. Be sure to subscribe if you like what you see, and let's get on with it. This week, the narrative team answer many of our questions. We hear about improvements to the reputation and hostility systems, plus we check out what the first ever river will be like. So this week's Inside Star Citizen kicked off taking a look at the upcoming rivers and river tech that has been in the works for some time now. Coming in Alpha 3.17, we will be getting one river that will be flowing through the hills of Microtech, which players will need to find as there are no missions or quantum markers for it, and by the looks of it, it will be in one of the temperate biomes on the planet. So if you see snow or ice, you are looking in the wrong location. Since CitizenCon last year, they have been working to take rivers from a tech demo to something releasable. They originally planned to release the rivers in Alpha 3.16, but they decided they wanted to push it more, starting with a refactor of all of the object scattering to help improve performance when distributing objects across planets. They also wanted to improve the density of assets like trees and vegetation around rivers without increasing the global density, so having a way that the vegetation is increased only around rivers and just not the whole planet, as is often true in real life where there is a water source. So they created something called on-demand spawn points, which will automatically scatter appropriate objects at that location, and they now procedurally place these on-demand spawn points along the length of the river and the basin. Very interesting to hear about the tech requirements to create more of a hands-off process for future development. Rather than spending a long time placing objects for each river, spend a little longer developing the tech that will do it all procedurally. Along with other tech requirements, this meant that the 3.16 window was missed, but it is all the better for it, as it'll have many different interactions for the player. For example, for 3.17, we will now be able to walk into rivers and oceans so long as you have a helmet on, which is a big win. And as it says there, the animations will likely change, probably just reuse the wind effect animation perhaps until they can create a more bespoke one, like you're walking through water. You'll also be able to drive your gravlev bikes over oceans and rivers without falling through and exploding. There will also be harvestables around the river's edge for players to explore and collect. And they also did a rework of the water caustic system, which will reflect light onto objects like ships, trees, and rocks, and onto the surface below. It also looks like ships might be able to sit in water, or I don't know about floating on the top of water, but you can see here it is sitting in the river. The Planet Content team are yet to dip their toes into the rivers, so do expect improvements in the future patches. But the next improvements are going to be for viz areas, so you'll be able to throw things into the river and watch it float down. That will be pretty cool, especially if you manage to build maybe 2 settlements along the river. The settlement upstream could throw supplies or boxes into the river, and it can carry those downstream to the other settlement where the people are taking it out. That'll be kind of cool. They're also doing work on the foliage shader, which will create more varied and seasonal foliage across the planets and rivers. So happy we will have seasons. Living on a planet will be insane, and just seeing it transition from season to season, let alone growing crops and having a farm and so forth. He also wanted to take it to the stage where an artist can be creating a planet, and then when they want to create a river system, it'll just be done. They don't have to do a lot of clicking and so forth. He does mention that each river is about 1 to 2 clicks, but it needs to be capable of placing hundreds of rivers per planet without even thinking about it. Now, as much as I would, of course, want hundreds of rivers straight away, I would even take tens of rivers straight away. But what I really appreciate about CIG's approach is that they realize it's pointless handcrafting a few rivers for the sake of getting them in game. They know in order for it to scale, retain its quality level, and work with the rest of the game and tech, they spend a bit more time just finding the very best solution. And for rivers, it's no different. So creating a tool that will place rivers procedurally with eventually little to no alterations after the fact will mean hundreds of realistic rivers and lakes and basins found throughout all the planets of the verse will be possible. And although this does take a little bit longer to get released, it's certainly a better idea than the alternative. Not to mention they find ways of improving performance as well. For me, I'm really looking forward to firstly finding the river and walking or driving the Gravlev bike, depending on its size, all the way down it, checking out what it has to offer, and just how it looks and feels, and hopefully one day soon we can have even simple missions, maybe requiring players to collect harvestables from the banks for a company and building reputation with them. It is also great to hear that water no longer just kills you, and you can explore the oceans as well. Some nice big improvements coming with 3.17, and hopefully it won't be too long until we are seeing hundreds of rivers across the planet and all the various planets in every system as they roll out. Now, next up, we heard about the upcoming improvements to reputations that are coming in 3.17 and beyond. To further improve and expand on the missions and dynamic events we have, they will be implementing new features into the reputation and hostility system. Currently, all relationships with NPCs are static, and you cannot become friends with the criminals or enemies with the law enforcement. Also, if you accidentally shoot someone, even with a single bullet, this means others are then immediately allowed to open fire on you, which is definitely not ideal. So to address all this, firstly, reputation will start to drive your hostility, which means as you build up an affinity with an organization, they will see you as a friend and not shoot at you, or eventually start to actually protect you. But on the flip side, if you start attacking law enforcement and committing crimes, then they will start hunting you down and attacking you on sight. Now, in the slightly more distant future, to address this single bullet issue, if you are around an org that likes you, then there will be a larger threshold that you'll need to break over to cause them to attack you. They don't want this to be global, so players can abuse it, but it will be a benefit if you are friendly with them. So I guess this means that if you have enough rep with an org or a group and you accidentally shoot them once or a couple of times, they will waiver it and acknowledge that it's just an accident and not attack you and just let it go. For 3.17, he says the changes will be pretty invisible to players, as it's more a point of giving the features and tools to the developers so that they can continue to build the content for 3.18 and onwards. This will enable to make it so that you can actually build up reputation with Xenothreat, so giving more purpose and reward for players who want to run the role of a pirate or a criminal, as well as build upon the available missions and content for criminals to do outside of the events. He also mentions that with additional dynamic events rolling out in the future, they can start building with this in mind from the start, allowing players to properly join each faction. Now, really happy to hear about these changes. Of course, the rep and hostility system is an ongoing system that has changed massively since we first saw it roll out. These updates will really expand on that feeling of progression and reward players accordingly for what they want to do and for the work that they have done. Also, expanding on the criminality options is so important for Star Citizen. Pirates, or just criminals in general, should have just as much gameplay and depth as any other profession, and give them stuff to enjoy and get good at, which will A, provide content for pirates, which I'm sure I'll need to create a separate account to try out, but also B, take the attention away from non-criminals, giving pirates other things to get on with without just attacking people they see as they fly around. So an important system to keep improving, and I'm very intrigued as to what this other dynamic event could be. Anyway, that is Inside Star Citizen. Let us move on. So Star Citizen Live this week was a Q&A with the narrative team answering our questions. The first question being, will we see the return of missions with lore or stories behind them like the old Tessa Bannister missions, following a quest line to see the story unfold? And they say yes, that is the goal. Right now they are building the mechanics of various mission types so that it can scale, but ultimately they do want to apply more story and character to get people more involved. At this time, it is about getting the blueprints and framework for the missions functioning and refined, and the work happening on the reputation system is also part of how missions will be more interesting and how the many factions and people of the verse will react to you differently. So I guess it's just building that framework first so that there's plenty of ways of scaling the missions and then developing more story-driven missions once they get to a point where they're happy to move on to it. Next question, the Klaus and Werner laser repeaters are all named after Earth animals except the Galdurine. What is a Galdurine? Now they said that a Galdurine is actually a fictional animal within the PU and is yet to be established. They say they use normal Earth animals as well as fictional animals, but the team are yet to design the Galdurine. And as the art teams create different and new, more unique animals and creature types, the name Galdurine might fit one of these creatures that they come up with. But the lore team said that they don't like to just create everything from start straight to finish, as this can really limit the creativity of the art teams or the concept teams. And they want those developers to have the creative freedom to explore more. Now, I really loved hearing this answer. The narrative team are really phenomenal at their job, there is no doubt about that, but so are the concept artists and the designers, and it's great that narrative don't want to step on the toes or hinder the art teams by kind of already writing a description of certain things like creatures. I think it's a great approach that allows all the teams to flourish. And also, it will be very cool to bump into a Galdurine one day while we're exploring wherever they live. Kind of a follow-up to that last question, they also would like players to discover and unravel things as we play, so they don't want to resolve everything inside the written fiction. They want to bring this into the PU so that we can help grow and experience it together. Next question is, have the Tavaran citizen numbers increased since the Better Together initiative that promotes Tavaran becoming citizens and voting? Now, they are yet to fully explore the details of whether the numbers have gone up or not. They will certainly explore this in the future, and it's likely that direction, especially with Suj Kosi being elected as the first Tavaran senator. And also, they feel that the war with the Vanduul that is happening right now, it's likely that the Tavaran would join up with the UEE Army or Navy and fight alongside humans and earn their citizenship that way. It'll be really interesting to see this unfold, and I can't wait to see some locations flooded with all the various alien races, or even hiring some alien crew members. I think it would be amazing to see a Gian or Tavaran grabbing a rifle on your weapon rack and helping to defend against borders. That would be pretty cool. Next question is, what is the narrative's role as it relates to Star Citizen and Squadron 42? Now, for Squadron 42, the story is locked down in terms of what's happening and the missions, so it's more supporting what is needed from the Squadron 42 teams, whereas the Star Citizen Persistent universe is more open-ended and narrative pretty much touch every aspect of the game, be that mission text, item names and descriptions, locations, and so on and so forth. They also work with AI to help with character dialogue and so on, plus continuing to develop the universe itself, and of course the alien races and their languages. So if you are new to Star Citizen, do check out the Gian and Banu language, which are properly developed and still developing languages in which they brought in external linguist Britton Watkins to help develop. You can actually learn Gian now and speak it, and there are ways and means and people to learn alongside. Next question, how close does lore influence gameplay in the PU? Should the things that we read about be indicative of the things we will see in game? Now, this is more of a yes and no answer. Early lore posts, not as much than the more recent ones, as they were written way before any gameplay existed, but they did purposely not write too much detail in how things are done in these lore posts, so they didn't hinder the designers when they were actually coming up with the processes. But do expect that as the gameplay gets more fleshed out, lore will begin to get more detailed, and I personally think it really depends on what you're reading. The fictitious stories, like A Gift for Baba for example, are more like books today with fictional characters that don't exist in the verse, but are more telling a story of characters in the verse that aren't necessarily real. Whereas a lot of the world building posts, like historical posts, they will have elements of gameplay in the PU later on. For example, the Artemis Ship that went missing while travelling to the now known system of Gliese. We have read that there are various artifacts that have been discovered, hinting towards what might have happened, and I think they even said a while back that it is a storyline that they would like to develop for people to explore. So a lot of the stuff we do read about in lore will exist in the game, and certainly much of the lore will have roots in the PU at some point, but just not everything we read will, which can make it somewhat difficult, but I see it as if it's a fictitious story, it won't, but if it's factual lore or history, then it probably will do in some way. Next question, since slavery and indentured servitude is part of the Banu's culture and the Banu are allies with the UEE, does it mean that the Banu slaver Suli is allowed to transport product through the UEE space even though it isn't legal in the UEE? Now, they say this is a very interesting question that will have likely a lot of interesting gameplay associated with it. And they said that if a Banu slaver ship is flying through UEE space, then it probably will be violating UEE laws. They said it'll be interesting to see what happens with the clash of cultures going forwards. Lots of gameplay opportunities, as many questions are raised for each culture. Now, it'll be really interesting to see how that unfolds and the missions or gameplay surrounding it. I can imagine some Banu will probably try to transport slaves through UEE space, and players might find themselves tracking them down if it becomes a big problem, or others may find themselves escorting or sneaking these ships through, perhaps. Lots of potential and avenues to explore, and probably something they'll have to figure out as it develops. Now, the next question is there an overarching storyline or theme that the team is working towards for the game lore? So right now, as mentioned before, they are still building out the foundational mission stuff, and once that is in place, they can start enacting the large narrative style missions and stories. They have had conversations as to when they should start injecting these more fleshed out stories into the PU, as of course we do have a live product now, even if it is still in alpha. But when do they kick it off properly? Is that during alpha, beta, after launch? Storylines like Xenothreat and the CDF, Ninetales and so on are part of the larger stories that are more localized to an area. There is certainly a large thematic conceit guiding the universe, but each system, planet, city, location, etc. will have their own story arcs as well and their own politics for the player to read about, hear unfolding over the course of the game's life, or even take part in. Now, I personally think it's probably best to wait for version 1.0 release before starting to kind of open up these missions, but I am more than happy for them to roll it out as soon as they're ready, as it has already been great fun exploring the lore of Xenothreat and joining the CDF to try and fight them back. And then I'm sure when we head over to Pyro for the first time, how cool it will be to see the Xenothreat in person, in their own location. It does give more purpose to what we are already doing in the PU. But for example, the Vanduul, the war with the Vanduul, I don't think we're going to see much of that until Squadron 42 is released before they bring it into the PU, but that is one big overarching storyline that is going on kind of right now, but of course in alpha we're not seeing it. So we'll see at what point they feel is right or ready for each of these storylines to unfold, but the more the merrier. Talking of the Vanduul, the next question is, do they still exist? And of course they do. Right now they are more focused on what is happening in Stanton, as that is what we are playing. And they do have more plans, but they want us to experience it in-game after Squadron 42 is released. But it does bring up a good point that the current or more recent lore posts have not spoken about the Vanduul in a while, which was the main focus for a long time, and this is most likely just due to Squadron 42's development and how they are wanting to keep things under the veil for the time being until we are all playing Squadron 42, and then we'll probably see that unfold a little bit more in the PU. But I would certainly love to see more lore posts talking about the Vanduul War. I'm assuming that due to timelines and the date at which Squadron takes place and the current date of the PU, it's kind of difficult, so they're probably holding off releasing this information right now until they have established a proper date in the PU once Squadron is released. But I do wonder how they'll tackle that, as it's quite difficult to do with the new Imperator already in power, and so the date in the verse keeps moving on, but Squadron 42 is a separate thing, and not to mention Squadron 42 Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 are still obviously way off. So it's not going to be easy to manage the timelines while in development and a live product at the same time, but I'm sure they'll figure a way. Anyway, next question is there a Moby-Glass competitor? Now, they have alluded to other Moby-Glass types out there. There is likely more competitors other than Microtech, but they do kind of have a stranglehold on the market right now. I would love to see some more options for Moby-Glass types. I think it would be a potential for the future, but I guess it's definitely not a priority or even a necessity right now. Anyway, that was the Q&A for the narrative team. Some great insights into what is happening with the lore, and as a big fan of the lore, I always enjoy hearing from this lot. In regards to the EU-PU gameplay team Q&A that was rescheduled, that will eventually come when the team are ready to come on screen. It sounds like they've been quite affected by what's going on in the world, so obviously they can have as long as they need. Inside Star Citizen next week, we'll be taking a look at the MISC Hull A, as well as a sprint report, which is going to be fun. And Star Citizen Live next week will be a Q&A with the visual effects team, so that'll be quite interesting hearing about moving maybe particles and visual effects over to the GPU and what they're working on now and coming in the future. Anyway, that was Star Citizen Live. Let us move on. So also this week, we have the latest subscriber update. There was a new Lawmakers Community Questions, which answers questions relating to Orison's smell, the creation of a star and solar system, what system in the UEE is seen as the most dangerous, and many more. The roadmap was updated, which was a very short but very sweet update. I will link my video covering the changes in the description below. The latest Xeno threat stats were released, providing all the statistics from the latest event. And finally, both the PU and Squadron 42 monthly reports were released, of which I will break down and release as individual videos for all to get the information sometime next week. So that brings us to the end of the show. If you do enjoy my content, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Also, I am able to do this thanks to my very generous patrons and channel members. If you appreciate what I do and would like to help make it even better from as little as $1 a month, all of the links are provided below.